I think it's really interesting because there's obviously the issue of, what do you mean by the divine feminine? Mm-hmm. And I think we're obviously created male and female, and those are the two ways in which God's attributes are instantiated or made plain in the world. And maybe this is what's so tragic too about sort of this idealization of the masculine, because we miss out on the gifts of the feminine have and has to offer the culture. But you can see too, there's that beauty of the complementarity of male and female, and even one of my favorite scripture passages is it's Isaiah, I think it's 49, where Scripture mentions that even if your mother could forget you, I will not forget you, and I think that feels like such a feminine, divine attribute and aspect of it, because it's very hard for a mother forget her child.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No, it's not. So it tells you even more so, if God can do better than any human woman. I think it's, one of those places that just is a great source of wonder, is to start thinking about what are the ways in which women embody the attributes of God in a feminine way.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in again. I have an exciting guest today. Her name is Dr. Carrie Gress. Carrie Gress is a recognized fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, esteemed founder and co-editor of the online women's magazine Theology of Home. Residing in Virginia with her family, she has successfully authored 10 insightful books, including the notable work The End of Woman. Her multifaceted expertise and passion make her a prominent figure in the field. The End of Woman. So that's because we're asking, what is a woman, probably? Like, why did I call it that? Yeah,
name?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, the interesting thing about this book was I came up with the subtitle before I came up with the title. How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. It just seemed to sort of flow out of it that this was really the result of this effort. Yeah, The End of Woman, I think, just captured something, that this is, we're trying to erase women, but obviously not using the word erase. But it feels like there's some element where, as a culture, we're just missing what it means to be a woman. And it's sad and sorrowful. And it's, something that I feel like we really need to reclaim, bring back,
and talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, wait a minute. Let's not make the conclusion yet. We don't have a proper conclusion yet.
Yeah, women aren't over. But it's also, my book looks at feminism all the way back to the very beginning, starting with Mary Wollstonecraft. And one of the patterns that I saw threaded throughout the whole book was really this desire to solve women's problems by making women more like men. And I think that was really part of it. I mean, it just kept popping out all over, in the writings of so many different women, different time periods. It was really a cycle. And I think that we can see that from the second wave on, is this idealization that we have of the masculine. I said many times before, we haven't really said anything good about being a woman or motherhood for about 50 years now, because we've been so focused on this idea of women being independent in every single sphere of their life. And that kind of isolation, it's been amazing to see the fruit of it. It's not making women happier. And this is really the lie that's out there, is that all of this effort to be independent is going to free us from all these things that are holding us down and making us miserable, when in fact it's just the opposite. It's really, we've gone to battle against the husband and our children, creating this isolation, which is actually creating an incredible amount of very unhappy women.
Well, I wonder, the Christian mother, the Christian woman is Mother Mary. She's with child.
Yeah.
There is no individual. There's mother and child.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we've taken and tried to create an individual woman. Mm-hmm. That was definitely going to push away children.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And you see this in the language. It's very subtle. And I didn't notice it for a long time until the book was almost done. The language, even with Mary Wollstonecraft, starts, and she didn't necessarily mean it in this way, but it gets used again, these waves, where she speaks of women as being human. And it creates a sort of category above male and female, such that women can sort of slide into it. And you see this idea develop. The rhetoric in the second wave was things like, the feminism is the radical idea that women are human, or women are people.
Human.
human.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I never noticed that.
It's used over and over again. And so it also, so you take this idea of a woman being human and not being a woman. They don't want to use woman or certainly not mother anymore. And then you add on Simone de Beauvoir's ideas about how we're being authentic when we can do whatever we want.
When we're out of the house.
Yeah.
We can be authentic when we're not at home.
Yes, exactly. That and also when we're not limited to the gender that we have.
Right.
All of that comes into play such that then women are sort of this new category of just human. And what does that look like detached from husband and children? And that's the question that's asked over and over again. Mary Wollstonecraft asks that. So does this group I just discovered called Heterodoxy.
Oh, yeah.
I think I sent you this article I wrote about this group of women that I just learned about. They were all in Greenwich Village back in like the 1916, and they started this group called Heterodoxy, and you could only join if you somehow were unconventional in your beliefs. And they were really the ones that were trying to, again, push children into this communal parenting, really free women up from any kinds of obligation to husbands. Free love was very involved and engaged in all this. So anyway, it's interesting when you start seeing these patterns and this manipulation of language and how that's stuck in our minds. And, even so deeply that I think we have this idea that we can be mothers or not. It's sort of like getting a driver's license,
Right.
This is actually what blew my mind. I know you know the book by Eric Nauman called The Great Mother. And he's got this amazing round grid where he puts all these mothers on it. There's the great mother, the good mother, and then there's the terrible or bad mother. All these categories are filled in, whether it's abandoning or torturing. I mean, those are obviously the bad examples of motherhood. And then the good examples are, the Blessed Mother, as you mentioned, and other women, throughout history in terms of goddesses and whatnot. But what's fascinating is that everything is incorporated in that. And I remember looking at it and my mind just being blown. We can't get out of being mother or women.
Right.
It's just part of the deal. We can be bad mothers or neglectful mothers. And I don't just mean biologically, I also mean spiritually and psychologically too. I think made a real change in my own thinking about this when I started realizing, I try to cut out motherhood.
I wonder if we've done too good a job of reducing, right? Because now when you think of something, say something happens, something catastrophic happens to someone, and you're not going to see them anymore, so they've died. If that's what you focus on solely, you focus on the loss, you focus on the death. But if you know the person, there's this whole umbrella of life that's all around in all the positive experiences that you had with this person that is much, much bigger than this one moment in time. But if you reduce everything to, reduce this trouble with family to abortion, yes or no, well, that's just, it's terrifying and significant, but it's among all these other decisions we've made, and it's a category that's much, much bigger than, and we're trying to decide something. It's like, it's almost like trying to divide an atom, which causes a bomb,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. I have thought a lot about how, abortion in particular is being fueled by feminism and this idea that we have to work and the children and the husband and the family are against it. Exactly. They work against us. It's really interesting. And, I think this is one of the other things that has really motivated me is to try and figure out how do we create a culture that has that kind of richness such that we understand that a woman is a mother, that those things overlap and coincide and are part and parcel. And that, even if we don't have biological children, we're still meant to mentor others. We're still meant to love others and think of others. And, even women, certainly in the workplace, are going to have a different approach to their colleagues than the men are. And, this is just sort of understood. So it's really interesting to start thinking about what happens to our culture if we start thinking in these broader terms of what a woman is instead of just this, teensy idea of independence. And then suddenly, like you said, there's sort of a bigger pool from which to understand things. And, I've spent a lot of time looking at culture. And, even when I wrote the book, The Anti-Mary Exposed, one of the things that struck me so dramatically was that the culture has been destroyed by left media, by magazines, daytime television, Hollywood, politicians, book publishing. All of these areas have sort of taken over, and they've made this independent woman look very attractive and savvy. And I think those of us on the other side, we're busy trying to make arguments, but we're not showing what it actually looks like. This is one of the book series that I did, Theology of Home. It's highly illustrated with a lot of beautiful pictures of pregnant women and families and homes and things that
hospitality.
Make you, right, things that make you want to just curl up and, read a book in a room, or, you feel safe and nourished and, all those things.
Right.
The women provide in spades. I think that is one of the things that we need to do better, is try, like you were saying, try to make a bigger vision instead of just that one decision of helping women kind of see a bigger picture.
I mean, even what's going on in the Middle East right now is a targeted issue that is a much bigger issue about whether we believe in success or not. And you look at those people over there and you think, they're a canary in the coal mine because they're showing what's happening, but it's a much bigger misconception, right, that's going on that we have to talk about it. And we should talk about it largely, because then I think we can talk. Because we can't talk when we just talk about those little issues. And they're big issues, but they're small compared to everything.
I've listened to a number of your podcasts now, certainly the ones that you did with Janice, and I always love that you bring up with feminism this idea of negotiating, because I think this is something that feminism hasn't really ever had to do. It's dictated what it wants because it has this women get this victimhood status, and so therefore they don't have to negotiate. They're just right. You can't question their orthodoxies, really. And I think this is one of the hardest things to grapple with, is that men don't want to engage in these conversations. They don't, they feel like there's no way for them to win these conversations. That's right. And so it's really incumbent upon women to start having these conversations and start sorting through
if it's a man talking and they don't agree with them, they tell them directly that they don't.
Fine, right?
But they can't do that with women, because they've always taught to open the door, to open the door for women, to make sure that they're comfortable, make sure they're taken care of. And so even when they're in conversation with them, that is naturally where they're going to go. So it's very difficult for men. It's up to us, really. It's up to women.
It really is. I was on the fence for a long time about it, and then I just really realized, men cannot do it, because, feminism is like kryptonite. It just silences them. They don't want to enter into this conversation, and they're not going to defend themselves the way that women have. There's not a masculinist movement, to sort of balance things. There's obviously things like, trying to work for men's rights and those types of areas legally, but it's not a whole movement that's been shifted the culture based on men being victims. I mean, it's almost kind of funny if you put it that way.
Yeah, that's right. Although, boys they're not encouraged.
Not at all. Yeah.
And so, I think that is also at the feet of the feminist movement as well.
No, I think you're exactly right. And that just even how do you have a future and a mission and a vision when you feel like, the marriage that you have might not last, the children that you have might not be taken care of, or they'll be taken away from you. All of those kinds of things that we see over and over in the culture today. I think it's been really hard on men in the ways, I didn't mean to imply that they're not victims, but for them to put that out as some kind of a campaign is laughable. But the reality is incredibly heartbreaking, especially because it is so widespread at this point.
Yeah.
And, particularly in the education. I've homeschooled my children. I had 2 daughters who are now in school, and then I have 3 sons. And, it's just been so interesting watching the different ways in which they learn, but also just to see what they absorb from the culture and the things that they need to feel like they have to apologize to their sisters for. It's just in the ether for them, and they don't realize. And gratefully that, my husband is really good about helping them be proud of the gifts that they have as boys and growing into men. But it's something has to be taught to them. They're not going to pick it up from the culture.
So you homeschool your kids, and you haven't ever sent them to school?
So my 2 eldest daughters do go to school now, and then one of my firstborn son is going to school next year.
But they started without going to school?
Yeah.
They did homeschool?
Yeah, we did some kindergarten with them, and then we homeschooled after that. So, yeah, it was just...
What did you see in the school that made you take them out of school?
Well, one of them was a Montessori school, which I just thought was fantastic for all the tactile. And I had a number of small children, 5 and under. And so it was just a great thing for me to be able to have them.
You just have them all together.
Right. And I just felt like there was something outside of me that they could be given. I was tired and just finished my PhD and all of that. So it was a really great opportunity for that. But every year we kind of analyze, like, what are we going to do this year? And make decisions based on, our resources and time and what the children need. So it certainly feels like it's never been perfect, but it's really worked for them. And I think my daughters in particular, someone was just asking me yesterday about homeschooling, and she asked them, did you guys like homeschooling? And, gratefully they did. We did a lot of it online. There was a really great program that we had, so it wasn't just me. In fact, my eldest daughter, she thought that I was just being mean when I would assign her schoolwork. So that dynamic just didn't work for us, but we had to find something where they were challenged, but still, learning a lot. And
Did you run into Charlotte Mason?
I like Charlotte Mason a lot. My problem is that I'm not crafty. I'm not that creative.
Are any of your kids?
They are. So I farmed out a lot of our art classes. We found a really great local little art class that they could take to all of them together at different points, which was really fun and nice. And, they'd meet at the park or all kinds of different things. So it was great to be able to find little things that they could do where my areas of weakness are. But yeah, I don't consider myself some sort of great homeschooler. But again, it was just what we needed to do. And
well, I talked to Sam Sorbo. Kevin Sorbo is her husband.
Sure.
Yeah, and she wrote a book. I can't bring it to mind exactly what it's called, but she decided to homeschool her kids, and she thought maybe she wasn't qualified to do that. And Sam's really, very smart, right? So yeah, obviously she could teach her kids, but it took her a while to be able to have faith in herself. But it started that her husband had gone off on a film shoot, and she took her kids with her, so she had to teach them at that time. And when she brought them back, she put them back to school. When they came home with their homework, looked kind of like what she was teaching them. Yeah. So she wondered what they were doing at school. And, eventually she took them out and homeschooled them and realized that she was perfectly adequate person.
Yeah.
And that they didn't have to spend as much time every day being in school.
That's
a big deal.
It's huge, just the amount of time that you can get things done quickly. And, I really like the idea of just living your life, too, of going to museums when you can and the farmer's market. And sometimes one of my children will travel with me on different trips and just elements like that I think go a long way in broadening their horizons. And, they pick up a lot in those experiences, too, that I think is really important.
We sent our kids to school. Things were starting to go kind of strange when they went to school, but it wasn't strange enough yet that we took our kids out. But when they left home, the number of times that we each went somewhere with our kids were very few. Few and far between, because that 18 years goes very fast. And I think that if your kids are home with you, I imagine you have more opportunity, even because you have the entire day, and it can be only just an hour trip. It doesn't have to be a weekend or something, but when your kids are in school, it has to be a weekend. Right? And so
sort of
different dynamics in the families, it causes different dynamics.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you about, you lost your father. You lost your father, and can you tell me about the journey that it's taken you to find your way past the pain and the death and into truth?
He died when I had just turned 16. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I want to say it was like in August, and then by the time, I think he died April 15th. So it was very quick, and my parents actually, made the decision to not tell us for a long time that he was dying. And it was they wanted us to get through Christmas. I think one last good Christmas together. Yeah. So it was a bit of a shock when he just really precipitously fell off the health scale. Around February, I think, and he had a great faith, and I think it was he was a Depression era child, and so he had a great work ethic and had started his own business. I'm an entrepreneur, and somebody that I think so many people looked up to. And so it was really interesting to just watch the dynamic within our family and, the larger support from the community. But I know that after he died, I think I was just left with that big question, like, why did he have to suffer so much? I remember you could feel tumors in his hands, and he was on so much morphine when he died, and because he died in our home. I think that was a really big question for me. And then I also, I had been pretty rebellious when I was younger. It was sort of this natural, challenge of
questioning everything.
That, and also just seeing what I could get away with. There was sort of this intellectual puzzle that was was very charming and enchanting to me. And then suddenly he wasn't there anymore. So the rebellion just ended.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
There was no one to rebel,
to play with.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, my mom was grieving, and she took over his business. So, she was busy. And so I very quickly had to make a lot of decisions on my own that I don't think I probably would have made until I was in college, because I wasn't being supervised the way that I had been when he was alive. And so, it just made me really start questioning everything and really looking into faith and really considering how I was living my life, and was this really making me happy? And I think if he hadn't passed away, I can only imagine what would have happened with that rebellious spirit just, growing and growing and growing over the years. But, so it definitely made me grow up very quickly and start thinking about much bigger questions than I had ever, considered before his death.
So when you went to university, what did you study when you first got there?
So I studied history. It took me a long time to really figure out what I wanted to
It took me till I was 22.
Wow.
To decide which direction I was going to go.
I was pretty close to that.
Well, when you're creative, everything looks good.
It does, doesn't it? I know. Can we just do all of this? So, I took a lot of anthropology classes, and I've started questioning myself. Did I think that they were archaeology? Anyway, I don't really think I thought that, but it was just a funny thing, because I've always been fascinated by archaeology as well. But for whatever reason, I decided I really wanted to get into philosophy, and I did a master's degree in philosophy. And I think much of the motivation was that I just felt like my education, it wasn't my parents' fault. It was just the way schools, it's just the trends. It was the 80s. And I hated the fact that there was so much I had to go back and learn, including languages. And I really wanted to understand the pieces. How did we get to this point, both historically, but then also what's the philosophical path through it? And so I first did a master's degree, and then I just kept going. And always in the back of my mind, I thought, I want my kids to be better educated than I am, and to understand this stuff implicitly. And so while I was not very good at teaching them the ABCs, I'm actually, this summer, I think I'm going to teach my older daughters some kind of class on, post-French Revolution, moving forward, what were the philosophical trends? Just because I think there are so many key pieces that we just don't learn about. Philosophy then really became where my passion was at, when I started understanding that you could kind of decode what was happening on a cultural level and political level and religious level as well.
Yeah, so you were born into the Catholic Church, yes?
I went to Sunday Mass, but weren't really practicing deeply. And, that was one of the things that my father, I think his death really promoted in me. I know, the last thing that he did before he died, we hadn't talked to him in a week, and he made the sign of the cross with his hand when the priest came to give him the final last rites. And, it makes an impression on you when you're young, and you haven't even seen, eyes move in a week. And that's what happened.
That's what he said.
Yeah. That's what he did.
That's his communication.
His last sign. Yeah. So that was important to me, and I think I also was really fascinated by apparitions of the Blessed Mother, whether it was Lourdes or Fatima. I was really intrigued by what was that. And
how young were you when you thought that?
I remember watching the Song of Bernadette when I was 7 with my dad, and it was just always kind of seemed like it was just of interest throughout the ages, or throughout my youth. And then as I grew older, I started praying the rosary actually with a group of women that were my mom's age. And that was really instrumental in changing me significantly, because I started really understanding the faith and understanding, it's like mortal sin that I had never heard of before, and growing in grace. And
did you do the rosary every day?
That's when I started to.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Marian consecration through St. Louis de Montfort was something that people brought to my attention, which I'd never heard about. So
explain that to me.
St. Louis de Montfort was, I think he was 1700s. He was a Marian, had strong devotion to Our Lady. And he formulated this consecration where you surrender yourself to Our Lady and she becomes your mother. She takes over. It's been something that I think a lot of people, he called it the shortest way to heaven because she's tending you. So yeah, it was little things like that. But simultaneously, actually, it was really interesting because I had a grandmother who was very involved in the New Age movement. Oh, and so I was getting, I had these female influences on both sides. I can see now, like, what a battle it was that I was going through at that stage, and I didn't realize it. But gratefully, I had enough of I had a contemplative side. I just liked being at quiet, and we had a house in the mountains that I could go up to on weekends and just walk around in the snow and hear the coyotes and smell the pine trees and smell the snow. And it was experiences like that of just being alone in the silence that really, I think, between that and the rosary, just finally pushed me in the right direction.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Yeah,
that's lovely.
Yeah,
I've always gone outside and walked. Wherever I was. It was funny because I've been living in cities for a while. I was from a very small town, 2,000 people only.
Wow.
Like right behind our house, you could take your skidoo out of the garage and you'd be in the woods.
Wow.
And as far as you wanted, up to the North Pole probably.
Wow.
Because I was so far north.
Yeah.
400 miles north of Edmonton.
Wow.
Midnight sun in the summer practically.
Oh, yeah.
You could take a picture at night without a flash at midnight. So it was
amazing.
An amazing place to grow up. And the nature. I just was up there last week, and the sky just goes on forever, and you can, because it's prairie, you can see the different cloud formations all around. Wow, it's really spectacular.
And it changes so quickly. It must.
Yeah.
Too.
I could see. I was a lifeguard, and I could see the weather in the morning if I was going to have to shut down the pool in the afternoon.
Wow. And in Virginia, where I live, you get like 5 minutes because it just changes so
I went
fast.
to Montreal. I'd go in a store and come out and be raining, and I'd think, where'd that come from?
I didn't see that coming. Yeah,
that's right.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot. My grandmothers were at church. I knew that I went to Sunday school. I was a Protestant, but I was younger than my siblings, and by the time they all left home, I was 12. I stopped going to school. I stopped going to church. My parents didn't go, and I just found out recently when I entered the Catholic Church. About a week before, I found out that my grandmother baptized us. Wow. It wasn't my mom and dad. And I had no idea. I was the youngest in the family, so I was very, very young. And it only came up because we were designing my dad's celebration of life for the summer. And for some reason, my brother and my sister talked about our baptism and who baptized it. It was a grandmother. And I thought, a grandmother. Yeah. And I thought, that's interesting because Grandma was Catholic. But when she was young, I think the feminist spirit got behind her and she left the Catholic Church and became a Protestant. But then she went to my mom's house and none of the kids were baptized. And I think a little guilt happened to her. So she baptized us into the Protestant church.
Wow.
And I talked to a priest lately who sees visions, I think is what he does. And he was praying and he said, your grandmother, are you close to your grandmother? And I said, I was close to my grandmother, both of them actually. And he said, well, your grandmother's with you now. And I thought, and she's with you, like she's with you. And I thought, isn't that interesting? That I've come back to the Catholic faith and now she's with me again, which I thought was a very healing circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really special.
But we don't know.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We think that life is, that we can see what we should do next without listening and contemplating and seeing what the next right thing is to do, right? So we're trying to orchestrate. People are trying to orchestrate what they think is right and wrong without the guiding principle that is the bedrock of our church that tells us, no, you have to listen.
Yeah.
And you have to contemplate. Yeah. And you have to stay silent. And that's why there's all this, I think, insistence on silence, is because without silence, you can't see what's going on.
We're here. Yeah. And I like the idea of just your grandmother, too. I think that, so many of us, my grandmother, because my father was so much older than when I was born, his mother was quite old when, my memories of her. But just that wisdom that the grandmothers feels like they used to have. And, I was looking, when I wrote one of my books, I did all this research on, are they so wise grandmothers? And I looked around a lot, and I was amazed at how many unwise grandmothers I found, just a lot of superficiality. And I remember actually been researching this book for a couple of months, and I remember actually going to Mass, and there was this grandmother that was taking care of her daughter, and her daughter had just had a baby. And I remember crying in the cry room because it was so beautiful to finally see this woman caring for her daughter and grandson in a way that was beautiful and compelling. And it wasn't narcissistic and self-absorbed or racist or, I encountered all these things. But one of my favorite grandmother stories is about a priest that I know. He's actually a Ukrainian Orthodox priest. He's married and actually lives here in Canada now since the war. But his grandmother baptized him secretly during the communist era because his parents couldn't know that he was baptized, that anybody had any faith. And so I love that generation jumping that happens so often, that we just done quietly.
She was atoning, I think.
What's that?
I think she was atoning for leaving the church.
Yeah.
She didn't leave the church. She went to a Protestant church, and she was there every Sunday. But something made her leave the church, and I never heard why. So there wasn't some glaring mistake the church made or anything. It was a decision she made, and I had no idea why she left. A few months after I got better and was out at the hospital, my cousin sent me something. I opened it. It was my great-grandmother's rosary.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No. So I have my great-grandmother's rosary.
Wow.
That she kept with her always. And, I was not aware of all of this because I didn't live close to my in-laws or my extended family. They were a little ways away, although I visited them often. I wasn't right there, so I didn't know the inside story.
Yeah.
Although when I saw a rosary, I knew what it was.
Yeah.
So I think maybe when I was really little, I knew what it was, but then didn't see it.
What an amazing gift. I mean,
isn't it?
Like if those beads could talk, right? That her hands on them and just praying the same prayers. And I just love that. That's just an incredible gift.
Yeah, really. I just like, and it's tiny, wooden. I just like holding on to it. Yeah, it's really wonderful. And so when did you start your magazine, Theology of Home? So
Theology of Home actually kind of started on a whim. I had this idea that I wanted to write articles that were more fun. I'd finished a dissertation, I'd written several books, and I just suddenly realized, I know all these things about, I know this apothecary in Rome it goes back all the way to the 1300s. I know about this beautiful chapel in South Dakota. I know about First Communion gifts. And it was one of these things where I just started doing it for fun. And I felt kind of guilty about it. Why am I writing about this stuff? This is a little bit too fun and not, my normal stuff. And I did a couple of articles a week. And then I thought, I know there's a lot of aggregate sites where I could send my stuff and I knew that they would post it. But they wouldn't post this kind of stuff. It just felt too fluffy and silly. And so then I realized, why don't I start an aggregate site where I do this, where I publish things that women are really interested in that aren't going to get picked up by the other places, but that, women need to be encouraged in different ways. They need sites too that when you leave it, you don't feel like the world's going to end or you feel awful. We need to have some kind of inspiration. Exactly. And something rich. And I've always loved magazines. I love the model of it. I don't like the content really of them anymore, but I could just, even when my children were really small, my mother-in-law got a magazine subscription for me. And it was like my 10 minutes, if I could get everybody sort of situated, baby sleeping, etc. That was my luxuriating moment, was looking through this magazine. So I know we love to jump from topic to topic. We could talk about food and travel and something deeply theological, all those things simultaneously. It's sort of the female mind. In fact,
because we can go in lots of different directions. You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking when I was little, my dad's mom, I guess she used to do a lot of sewing. And my mom did a lot of sewing. She sewed all our clothes, right? Mm-hmm. But we used to get these magazines that had cutouts in them and clothes. Mm-hmm. And so this was my doll and It
Right.
was for...
And they had the little flaps.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember those too.
Yeah, those great. Those were great. I loved them.
How many hours did we spend doing that until it finally, it wouldn't stand up anymore because you had like somehow folded them bottoms.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I think it was McCall magazine. I think there was... I can't remember. Anyway, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like longer time ago. Mm-hmm. But I do remember that.
Magazines have been around forever. And it just feels like we tend to think of it, especially those of us who are more rational, we tend to think of it as fluff and not important. We're out there making these important rational arguments. And I've slowly realized, no, actually, this is what women pay attention to. This is why the left has dominated so much, because they understand the fluff. You slip in your own message and then everybody buys it and everybody buys into it. And that was the research that I did, that I realized we've got to start being more proactive. So I had already started that idea. And when I realized, okay, this is actually really important. And then the name Theology of Home came to me. I was on the treadmill and it just struck me, all the things that I do as a mom, and I know other moms do, is we really just want to get everyone that we know and love home to heaven.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah, that's right.
And yet our home is vitally part of that. It's a foreshadowing, a foretaste, really, of heaven. We want it to be sanctuary. We want it to be beautiful. We want it to be safe. We want it to be hospitable and nourishing. All those amazing things happen in that space.
Yeah.
And all those things happen in a different way, but at the church level, but they also happen in heaven. They're different realities, but it's kind of the same language. And so that was where the idea for that.
That's a good thought.
That came from, was this idea of Theology of Home. So I changed the blog title to Theology of Home, and then we came out with several books. And
so it really started, then the doors opened. Did they?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Hey.
And so now we post, we have a blog every weekday that comes out with 8 different articles that we aggregate from other sites. But
how many writers do you have?
There's 4 of us that do writing, but we don't do much of the content ourselves. We have a couple of women. We have one woman in Mississippi who's just this amazing, like Martha Stewart kind of woman that does incredible stuff. And then we have another woman, Denise Troll is her name, and she's older, an empty nester, and discovered her capacity to write, I think, after her children left home. And I kind of fangirled her for a long time on another site. And finally, I introduced myself to her, and she said, "Oh, one of my sons gave me your book at Christmas. And he said, Mom, these women are just like you." It's been great to meet these women and provide opportunities. Like another woman that I work with that's been involved from almost the beginning is Noelle Maring. And I asked Noelle initially to just write an article for me. And she'd never written an article before. And now she's written 3 books with me, and then she's written her own book called Awake Not Woke, and she's working on a next one. So it's been really fun to see these women who are never dreamed that they would have kind of this publishing career, and suddenly they have a place to not just write, but also really, have it become something much bigger than they ever dreamed. So, but in the meantime, we also, hear from so many who read our blog each day that just say, this is the encouragement I needed. I didn't have a natural community around me enforcing these things. And this is just kind of a great way to shore up my faith and my home and my life and, where my focus is at. So that's what we've been doing. But we're in the process of hopefully getting it into a TV series at some point, because the books have done really well. They've become kind of the standard wedding shower, baby shower gift, which has been really fun to see that aspect. And they're not edgy, they're the kind of things that you can give to anyone.
They're wholesome.
They are. And people, and I mean edgy, like The End of Woman is not a book that you're just going to give to anyone.
Right.
But Theology of Home, you can give to anyone of any faith, and they can find something in it that I think they would be thought-provoking and rich and something that they would really take away from it. So it's nice to have both, but I think both are important, and we haven't really done a great job of the richer content that goes down more easily.
And that goes along with hospitality too, right? Because you have to have those activities and you have to have that setting to have hospitality be successful.
No, I think that's a great point. And
my husband and I we talk about, when we have talked about what it is that he wants when he comes in the door, and what it is that I think of doing when he comes in the door. My dad, he drank. He drank after work. All the guys used to go to his office after work and bring a bottle. So then when he came home, he usually just sat in his chair and watched TV till he fell asleep. And my mom, I think, had some trouble at home that she never ever talked about when she was a child. So she didn't really trust my dad, but I think my dad was trustworthy.
Yeah.
He was. I know he was.
Yeah.
And so it was tricky at home to understand what things were going on, and my mom hardly ever had anybody over or anything. So when I got married, hospitality was something that I had to learn myself because I was never given the
doing it, right.
example at home.
And I think that is such a huge point, is we don't have these examples. We don't have the examples of what women used to do all the time. And so it feels either foreign or very challenging, or
we just don't know. We feel anxious that somebody's coming over and we don't know what to do to calm ourselves down. What do?
Yeah.
You cook them something. So it's ready when you get there.
Right.
And that's all you have to do.
Years ago, I had a roommate that she was really involved in protocol. She'd gone to the Washington School of Protocol, where diplomats were trained for, which fork goes with which part of the meal and whatnot. But she used to always say, the manners are really about making other people comfortable.
Right.
So that they know what to do. And that is just such a fundamental thing, that when you start thinking of hospitality and all that tableware in terms of, we want to make people feel comfortable in this environment. And even if the tableware is not there, even if it's just a plastic fork, I think that's just the beautiful gift that we can give people, is making them feel comfortable and hopefully leaving our homes feeling like they know themselves better. I know that was always a sign to me. I had some really amazing friends that were incredibly hospitable, and I spent a lot of time with them as a young woman. And I remember they always did this great meal on Saturday nights where they would say a lot of prayers, many of them from the Old Testament, and then they would share a loaf of bread and a cup of wine, and they would talk about the things they were grateful for from the week. And, everybody at the table had said something. It was just the richness of that ritual that I remember just thinking, I want to be able to do things like that in my own family, but I also took away this sense of my life was important and people heard me and I was seen and I was part of this much larger community than opening a jar of tomatoes.
That's interesting. That's interesting because you talk about ritual, which is practice, because ritual is something that happens over and over again at a specific time. Now we have people who don't know what a woman is, or they don't know if they're a woman or a man. And I wonder if this, because women have left the homes, we've gone off to work, so the home isn't what it was, and so there isn't this interplay of hospitality going on.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that isn't part of the, and then it makes you anxious when because I remember my husband was coming home from a trip, so he'd been away for a number of days, and I was in the house and I was not feeling confident. And then I thought, I'll just cook him lunch, and then all my anxiety went away because I had a purpose and I had something to offer, right? And so if you're not aware that is what will make you feel better, then you're stuck in this place of discomfort all the time, and then you start to wonder whether maybe you're not the right person anymore.
Right. Service and purpose and all of that. And I think there's something fundamental too about just realizing that your body is a home. It's your children's first home when you have biological children. But not only, it doesn't stop there, because you still interiorly carry those children. And, I guess this is the beauty of it being broader than just biological children. These people reside in you interiorly. I mean, this is the beauty of understanding women as a vessel. So the home then just becomes a larger reflection of that.
Yeah.
But what do we do if we never had a home that helped us understand that? And that's what I feel like is such a big leap for so many women, is this doesn't feel comfortable. This is really challenging. Right. I've never been trained in this. I've been trained in IT
corporate
or STEM
whatever.
All of that. That feels like a comfortable place to me. This feels awkward. And, I remember even my own transition to motherhood, just feeling like there were some serious virtues that I needed to work on. But it was amazing how I spent week after week thinking, okay, next week's going to get easier. Next week's going to get
Those
easier.
virtues were outlined in the Bible, though, weren't they?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Surprise.
And that's where you learn them. It's through that service and purpose of understanding. So I think you're exactly right that we can't understand. This is why we have such a problem understanding what a woman is because we've redirected all those energies to the masculine idol instead of believing that women are actually purposeful, doing doing good work. Instead it's really denigrated, and people think of it as, beneath us.
No, we're preparing the next generation. There might not be any other way to prepare them except for a mother's being there.
Yeah.
Not adequately, not just adequately, but to the best of our ability.
And I remember too, just learning how important it was sometimes for me to just be there, to just hold my kids,
to
just be present,
or just walk with them or something.
Yeah. It's the simple stuff. It's like,
yeah, it is.
I had it all cooked up in my head that it needed to be a lot more complicated. And, it's been nice finally with the fifth child. I've sort of sorted it out. But, it's like, oh, you just want to snuggle right now. Okay, I can do that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful that, what grows in that time where you aren't doing anything.
When my son was in high school, I used to walk the dog in the morning when he left for school, and he used to walk 3 blocks, not even 3 blocks, to the bus. And so I would take the dog to the park, but the bus was only a block away, so I'd just walk him to the bus stop. And that's when we would have our time together.
That's really sweet.
And it wasn't that we planned it, but that's when it happened. And it happened every day.
Yeah.
Because the dog needed a walk.
Right. No, that's really
so
special time.
And that's a ritual.
Yeah.
That's a ritual, or that's practice, like the practice of prayer.
Yeah.
Everything has to be, you have to have a practice. If you want something to sustain you, right, it has to be something that you can call on and you know how to do it and everything without even thinking.
Yep. Oh, that's well said.
Can you explain the essence of Mary Wollstonecraft's thought and why it's seen the way forward for today's feminists still at this point?
Yeah, so Mary Wollstonecraft is a really interesting character. A lot of people don't realize that she had sort of 2 stages of her life. The first one was she was sort of a school teacher and wrote a lot about educating women. And, a lot of it was very insightful, I think. And then she actually moved to London. And it's then where she started spending time with her publisher, whose name I think it was Joseph Johnson. She spent time with Thomas Paine, who of course is very involved in the American Revolution and then the French Revolution, and became sort of more radical as time went on. Yeah.
So really powerful people.
Yeah. William Godwin was another one whom she ended up marrying. Well, Godwin is a fascinating character. He had been a Protestant minister, and he realized he didn't believe in God, and so he left it. And it was very focused. Both he and Mary were very focused on the truth and had this sense of deep virtue, even if they were very unorthodox. The men that Wollstonecraft spent time with were considered dissenters because they weren't part of the Church of England. And so she ended up taking on some very radical ideas. And one of her best-known works was written against Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke was the one that initially called out the French Revolution and said, this is really dangerous. This is really how you radicalize people. And she, along with this cadre of men that she was spending time with, thought, no, the French Revolution is great. They had this new idea of thought and the way that we think about things, coming from Kant. So they all thought, if you just use your reason, you can sort of sort through all these things. We don't need tradition, like Burke is saying. We don't need these prejudices. We don't need superstition, which of course is code for the Catholic Church. And they wanted to toss it all out and just start over again. And so Mary Wollstonecraft actually went to Paris and was there for 2 years of the French Revolution. She ended up coming back after a relationship failed, and she was pregnant she had her first child at that point. And at that stage, she met Godwin again. But she continued to be involved with these very radical thinkers. And Godwin actually was known for being very anti-marriage. He thought monogamy was a kind of slavery, and he was in many ways, there was a lot of comparisons between him and the Marquis de Sade, who was, of course, pushing against all these taboos. Now, in character, these men were radically different. The Marquis de Sade was in jail and in France and had tortured all these people. And Godwin was this former Protestant pastor who was this new rationalist that was coming at things, he thought, in a very rationalistic way. And his thought is actually fascinating because of the fact that you see these ripples of the way in which it has led to our contemporary thoughts. So, for example, dealing with prisoners, his was the idea that, or people with mental illness, his was the idea that we can just find the right corrective for it. We don't put people in jail, or we don't say there's objectively, that objective law that if you break this law, then you do X. He thought it was a much more fluid kind of way of we can cure these people if we just have the right therapeutic situation. And that's what, you see all of that kind of expanding more and more throughout that era. So in any event, tragically, of course, she dies. She and Godwin started a relationship. She got pregnant, and then she died shortly after she delivered Mary Godwin Shelley, who became Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Wollstonecraft is interesting because she's trying to help women, of course, but has seen an incredible amount of broken relationships and broken people, starting with their own parents, who were just this awful example. Her dad was a drunk and a vicious man, and her mother was very submissive in a very unhealthy way, and she also favored her firstborn son and couldn't care less about the other children. And so Mary became a surrogate mother of sorts to the rest of the family, and just finding herself throughout her life in these awful situations. And so you can see this kind of sympathy.
Didn't have a good male figure.
Yeah. And so you can see, that there was this great complementarity between her and Godwin. And, by all accounts, they had a happy marriage. But you also recognize that she wrote 2 novels, one of which was published posthumously. It wasn't finished. But in them, she's really focused on this idea of emotional relationship. And the marriage isn't fundamentally important. It's about where you're finding your emotional satisfaction. So that's a piece that's going on where you can see some of Godwin's influence. You can also see, again, this radical idea of trying to get rid of any kind of tradition, because there's this new way of thinking and it's all just sort of built into our heads. And if we can just think rationally, then we can sort through all of our problems. And of course, that was the idea that was behind the French Revolution, and why the French Revolution was so bloody, as they tried to make France into this rational utopia, getting rid of even the months and re-quadranting the whole country so that it was broken up in these sections. And, it's just amazing the lengths that they went to sort of get rid of any kind of history and the past and tradition, and really saw it as awful. And so she was very much thought along those lines. But I think her biggest contribution was really this idea of egalitarianism, because she didn't want any kind of hierarchy. She's very outspoken about this in the work that she's a vindication for the rights of women that she wrote. She doesn't want a church. She doesn't want a military. She wants everything to be flattened. And that is, I think, one of the engines behind feminism, is this idea that there isn't any hierarchy anymore. There's no patriarchy. There's no anything. And so that's one of the pieces, is we have to rearrange civilization to sort of reflect this flatness where everybody sort of becomes interchangeable. And you can see that as we move forward, especially in the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet Union, where women and men become interchangeable. They're just both workers, and their children are farmed out, and, abortion and divorce are at the drop of a hat or a postcard. These ideas, I think, took root and were really expanded on. And some of it was done by her son-in-law, whom, of course, she never met, Percy Shelley. It's really interesting because he, I think more than anyone, actually articulated what the feminist movement became, because he took this idea from his mother-in-law, from Mary Wollstonecraft, who was very well known at that point. That idea of egalitarianism. He took another idea from his father-in-law, which was free love. He wanted to get rid of matrimony altogether, and he was very much a practitioner of it in his own life. Yeah. And then he took the occult. He was very interested in the occult and the devil and the diabolical. And you have to remember, this is like electricity is just coming on, where people are beginning to start thinking, trains are happening. I guess electricity was later, but technology is starting to take off in ways that it hadn't before. And so I think these elements all sort of played into, and you can see that with Frankenstein too. I mean,
if technology is possible, what else is possible?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So he took those 3 things and made them into what he called the women's revolution, and created this character named Sithna, who was this independent woman who never had a husband, never had children. And of course, that wasn't unheard of. But what was unheard of was that she became this model for other women, that other women during the era thought, oh, if only we could be like that. If we didn't have to have families, then everything would be fantastic. We would have this kind of independence that would free us from all of these awful things that women did, in fact, and of course, endured. So I think we have to, that's the hard part, is sort of parsing out, yes, women had very difficult lives, but the solution that certainly Percy Shelley was offering of radically transforming culture, free love, and the occult was not the medicine that was necessary or needed to
not to bring them forward to a better place.
No.
It was going to change things, though.
It definitely changed things.
But not for the better.
Things. No, not
no. And that's where we are in some ways, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I think that idea that he came up with, I mean, that's a fascinating thing, is this idea that he wrote about this Sithna woman. Her only relationship actually was with the devil. That was in 1810 or somewhere around there. And we still, if you look at the feminist movement now, it's still those exact same three pillars. This, free love. We need to be able to be sexually promiscuous the way we think men ought to be or are, or the men that we know are, and that's what we want. This radical egalitarianism of, no hierarchies. And then the occult. I mean, the occult is just everywhere. So they haven't gone away. And and that's the fascinating thing, is the feminist vision was actually created by a man. So,
yeah.
It's
yeah. Well, also the people who are, I've been with my husband, a lot on his journey, and I was there at the beginning, and the protesters, they were women, but they were also men. There's men in there, and and their role in that is to help these women that are the protesters get what they want, so that they can be a top dog. Because they haven't been able to be a top dog so far. So they join that way.
So interesting,
isn't it? So let's talk a little bit about the end of woman. Can you take me through what you were hoping that the readers would take away from this book?
Well, this book, from what it started out as and what it ended up to be, it was incredible just to see the change in my own thinking. And I was wishing that I had learned about Janice much, much sooner, because there was so much overlap in what she had already done. When I started looking into first wave feminism, I didn't really realize, I just thought it was good. I thought it would be, I thought I would spend 2 days reading first wave feminism stuff. I would get some great quotes from it and kind of include that in the book.
Right.
And, so this book was really meant to be similar to my book, The Anti-Marriage Exposed, but not from a Catholic point of view. It was much more secular and Protestant, and really that question of what is a woman? How do you start answering that, and why are we asking that question? How did that even come about? Because that's kind of mind-blowing to me that we've gotten to this point.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really just kind of to step through history. But like I said, I had no idea that the first wave had so many skeletons in the closet, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's really where what I thought would take 2 days, it took months and months and months of doing research on the first wave. And, one of the most helpful books that I looked through was this one called Satanic Feminism by a Swedish scholar that initially I didn't really know what the book was going on in the book, because I thought the man that wrote it was not sympathetic to satanic feminism. And then the more I started reading it and I read the dedication, and you start reading, it had been his dissertation, and it was published by Oxford University Press. So this wasn't some sort of fluffy book. But as I started reading through it, I was like, you know what? I think this guy actually thinks this stuff was good. The subtitle is something like How Women Were Liberated by the Devil, or something dramatic like that. But it was really remarkable because he went back to the 17 and 1800s and really chronicled, what was going on and the involvement of the occult, particularly in women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and a lot of the influences that I never dreamed were somehow involved in the occult. And Cady Stanton in particular was very much involved in seances and conjuring the spirits, and just that element. In fact, the table that she came up with, her document from the Seneca Falls Conference, was at that table. The table is now in the Smithsonian. It was her knocking table where the spirits would.
I see. Oh, okay.
Exactly. So in any event, it was. But that ended up becoming really the first part. Really helped me understand where the second wave came from. I think I always, we'd always heard the second wave just sort of took this radical leftist turn. And suddenly when I started going back to the early stuff, then I was like, no, this is actually just a continuation of it. It's an outgrowth of it. And, it was fascinating, like we were just talking about Percy Shelley, to see his role in that and the way that he influenced other women. And, some of the ideas, even Elizabeth Cady Stanton shared, this idea of, Eve was framed, or Eve was actually enlightened by in the fall, and that she, she got some wisdom from that. That was a rewriting of Genesis 1 that Percy Shelley did, and then she wrote about that as well, and actually got her thrown out of her own movement. Some for that, some of it was also because of the scandals that she was involved in. And anyway, it was, this was not this Victorian tidy organization of just, women making finger sandwiches for the suffrage movement.
Weren't they blowing up postal boxes?
Well, that was happening in England. Yeah, exactly. That Janice has done all that great research on. So, yeah, there was a lot of scandal and drama going on, and it makes sense. I mean, the Civil War just happened. You've got just all this upheaval. This is when electricity is really coming online. You've got this incredible amount of poverty. You've got all these people are dying left and right between the Civil War and then childhood diseases. So it makes sense that, seances and things like that really took off because people were trying to contact the dead, whom they missed desperately.
Right.
So it was really a rough era. And you also have the temperance movement going on, which has actually dwarfed the suffrage movement. So there's a lot of pieces that I think people are grappling with. And so to say that there was sort of a unified movement, isn't accurate either. I think there was a lot of pieces that were, and people didn't communicate, they didn't have email. So they're not texting. So you have these pockets of people doing different things too. But it was that, I think fundamentally it was great and interesting to see these three main points, again, that I was just talking about, the free love, the occult, and the restructuring of society, sort of being this band that went through the movement. So I outlined the first wave, and then really moved on to the second wave, and looking at particularly Betty Friedan. I don't think people realize that Betty Friedan was absolutely a communist, very much engaged in the communist movement. She never admitted it publicly, but there's a tremendous amount of research actually done by a friend of hers who wanted to just show that, this is a woman that was able to get around McCarthyism. She was able to get Marxist and New Left ideas out into the world without raising red flags and getting herself into trouble with the government. But now, as I go back and read Betty Friedan, you see, crazy things like calling the home a comfortable concentration camp. How did she get away with publishing that? It's kind of amazing. But to see how her whole effort is to get women out of the home and doing productive work outside the home, because already at that point, the Communist Party in the United States had decided, they had to decide, they had to make a decision because it was brought to the fore by a communist housewife who wanted to say she was doing productive work. And they said, no, raising children isn't productive work. You have to do it outside the home. And so Friedan was very influenced by this idea of how do we get women outside the home. And so this is why she's using things like making women feel like they're missing out. Again, this gospel of discontent that, goes back to the early socialists, where they're trying to use the emotions of women to stir them up and make them feel like I'm missing out. And we know, psychologically, it's such a lever. You can probably speak to that better than I can, but such a lever for women that we're missing out on something, or again, we're victims because we live in this comfortable concentration camp of our home.
Yeah.
Remember, these are the most privileged women in the world at that point. They're all Wesley and Vassar, very well-educated women that she said she interviewed. And this is, what she comes up with is we all have to leave the home.
Yeah. Well, what are we seeing now that are coming out of the Ivy League universities?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. It's been that way for a long time.
Yeah, it's been that way for a long time. And those are the people that have the voice.
Yeah. And that's, I think I move on past Friedan and obviously look at how this stuck so well. And I think that was, a lot of it was just the savviness of, someone like Gloria Steinem and Ms. Magazine, and being attractive and articulate and using television the way, in effective ways. Friedan was actually a bully. She apparently threatened to say a bad word 11 times if she didn't get her way on some TV show. And it was just amazing when you hear these backstories of just the ways in which they leverage their power to just get exactly what they wanted and be able to control the messaging in really, ways that were very compelling to women.
I love talking about this stuff. And I think people need to know these things.
Yeah.
Because people still think that feminism is a good idea. We have the vote. We can go to work. What else do we need? Maybe we need to have a family. And, there's other things we can do because we are very good at balancing many different things.
Multitasking.
We don't have to just go to work.
Yeah.
And we don't have to forego our relationship with a husband because two brains are better than one.
Yeah.
One brain is kind of confused usually.
Yeah.
Especially eventually becomes confused. And what about the environmentalism that's going on right now? Do you think that's related to feminism?
I think it is.
Going back to nature, the worship of nature?
I mean, there's absolutely a pagan element to all of this. That element of the occult and nature worship. And this is what happens when Christianity and Judaism are weak, is people have that desire to worship something, and nature is obviously the first thing that we're awestruck by. I grew up in Oregon. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
Yeah.
It's also the least churched place in the United States.
I see.
And it's because I think it's so naturally gorgeous that people feel like they can worship God in that environment. Well, then that worship of God becomes the worship of the nature itself when you don't have it rightly ordered in terms of philosophy or religious understanding or context. So I think it's part of that. But, fundamentally, all of these issues go back to power and control. And I think this is what women have been told that they have. I think this is why the woke culture is using these same categories. Environmentalism is the same thing, because then, like you've said, you don't have to negotiate when you're coming from that place of power. But also, and this is why the environmental voice is, I'm always confused and confounded by like those statements you hear, like 45,000 people are going to die of climate change. Like, I don't even know what that means. Like, how are they dying? That's just so amazing to me. It's like, where?
Oh, even the way they calculate carbon is wrong.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. It's not right. If you take, I interviewed a climate scientist, and if you take a container of air, the amount of carbon that's in there is so small. It's so small. It just is so small. And we're making it we're making it the most important chemical in the whole equation.
Yeah.
And it just isn't.
So what do you think about the connection between feminism and environmentalism? I've actually never really thought about it other than the fact that they're both ideologies of the kind of the same thread.
Well, I wonder if you've lost your way. I know in the Bible it talks about Baal. And so that is a return to nature worship.
Yeah.
And so, if you leave God, and you don't have good guidance in that direction, the transcendent, then that's one of the ways that you're going to veer off in. And so I think this is just one veering off from religion. And of course, feminism was a veering off from religion as well. Marxism and communism, that's all falling away from religion. And as soon as you fall away from religion, then you have multi-headed monsters that come up. And what are the multi-headed monsters? The environment, the oppressor and oppressed narrative, and now the gender ideology that we have. And so there's all these things that are going on that are very strange, of course, because we've lost our guiding principle.
Yeah.
And so
that's right.
They're related. Are they causal? Not exactly.
Necessarily, yeah. No, and I think that's a good way to look at it, to sort of contextualize it, because then what we're doing is disordering the order that has come with the Judeo-Christian tradition, and chaos is going to ensue. And also, people need something to worship. We are meant to worship something. Obviously, we're meant to worship God, but
something bigger than us, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why there's so much passion behind it, I think, because people get so emotionally connected to it. That was one of the really interesting things about this book, was digging into what has happened to reason, too, because there's so much about this that is very emotionally driven. Yeah. It's not rational. Right. And just to see kind of the drop-off, I looked into this work by a sociologist from the 1930s, that he was an atheist. He was agnostic. He had no religious convictions and wasn't trying to prove anything. But he ended up studying, I think it was 86 different civilizations. And he said he could pinpoint at which moment in every civilization they were going to start to decline. And the decline would involve the loss of monogamy, the loss of faith, and the loss of reason. And everything would devolve into emotions. And that moment, he said, he would spot it in a culture, and he said he wasn't sure if he should laugh or cry, because he just knew what was going to happen. And that was actually the end of a prohibition against premarital sex. So as soon as you get free love worked into the system, that's when everything starts really to disintegrate. So,
well, the only people who are having babies now are the Catholics and the Orthodox.
Yeah, and the Muslims,
right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
free love. That's the end result of free love.
It really is. Yeah. No, and what are people getting instead? They're getting depression and STDs.
OnlyFans.
Yeah.
Pornhub.
Yeah.
Yes. Right? That's pretty
loneliness.
Low.
I mean,
that's low. That's low.
Low and lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those two things go together. Low and lonely.
Yeah. It's no wonder people are so depressed.
Yeah. That's right.
You have no purpose.
Yeah. It's time to start praying.
Yeah, well,
it really is time to start praying.
No, it's beyond that point, I think. But yeah, no.
Well, for each and every one of us, it's time to start praying and taking our guidance from our conscience rather than from the media and the books and the magazines and the things that you're naming as driving society this way and that way.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right.
So I liked your article, The Gospel of Discontent, How Feminism Shattered Our Understanding of Motherhood. You really went from the early feminists in that talk through the more, recent past. Would you describe what you were reading?
Yeah, so that was a short article I wrote for the American Spectator, and it was great because my book had already come out, and it just felt like it was like the bouillon cube of my book. So if people want to really see what the book is about, that's a great place to start. But it goes back, I started from the early 1890s and talk about this socialist newspaper that was called Lucifer. And in this paper, it's talking about trying to get women angry, basically, to make women feel like they're victims. This, it's very much this idea. And then I move on to what happened with, the Soviets finally realized that they could actually, they saw all these women professors and bourgeois women that they initially had great disdain for because they were communists. The two groups did not get along, but the Soviets finally realized, we can actually harness that angst and use that for our own revolution. And they realized just how volatile women are emotionally and how easy it was to manipulate them. And so the woman that actually founded the International Day of Women, the Russian Soviet communist, she's the one that suggested this, that this is a great way for us to start using this angst that these women have and promote the Communist Party.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. It's really interesting to dig into these pieces. And that's just what kept getting churned up over and over again. And the feminists kept getting deeper and deeper into communism. And, as we discussed with Betty Friedan, she was very deeply involved in communism, despite the fact that she said she wasn't really interested in women's issues until the 50s. But there's plenty of documentation that she wrote articles related to Marxism before that, was very involved, you'd say sort of, I guess we'd call her kind of radicalized back when she was in high school and certainly in college and graduate school. So, so then you get to the second wave, and it's women like Kate Millett and Angela Davis, who were the disciples of sorts of Herbert Marcuse and Wilhelm Reich, who were New Left thinkers. They had come to Columbia University. Reich had actually written this book called The Sexual Revolution that was published in the 30s, like 1936. It was all of his ideas that were promoted in the sexual revolution. This idea of sexual repression is an evil, and you have to express everything that comes to mind or your desires. Otherwise you're really deforming your character, and all of this. Even the idea of kind of turning families against one another, and of course the idea of sexuality being something to be much more engaged in among children. Kate Millett was very much a proponent of pedophilia and sort of liberating children so that they, essentially be preyed upon by adults. So it's amazing to see just how deep Marx went, because what happened was this discontent that was created in the Marxist system. They used to use just the class warfare, and then it shifted with Reich and Marcuse. They wanted to make it about culture. They realized if we can change this into culture, and suddenly women are the victims and men are the victimizers, even though no one's culpable of anything, you can just automatically give those characteristics to them. That changes everything, because then women are kind of wallowing in this, almost the social status that comes from being victims. And men just lose all credibility. Their toxic masculinity is on the table. They can't do anything right from that stage on. Yeah. But that's how they were able to really get it wedded into the culture, was through women like Kate Millett and just kind of the normalizing of these ideas and women's movements women's studies programs at the universities and populating it among the kind of the young, hip, intellectual crowd, the hippies, really. So, yeah, it's pretty incredible how
I recognize a lot of that.
Yeah.
From my history.
Oh, I can.
Wilhelm Reich, I ran into him in university for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking my dad used to say that in order to have a nap, he had to hold on to a screwdriver if he wanted to have a little rest during the day. So his wife would get up.
Comforted him. I had a child that would sleep with a measuring tape, actually.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great.
That's very funny.
But yeah, so you can see how all of this really does become an engine for something like abortion and the deeper breakup of the family, because if work is the only thing that we're supposed to be geared towards, then what does the rest matter? And yet that's Marx. I mean, we're great.
Well, the birth control pill, we haven't mentioned the birth control pill, but that was a pivotal time to make men and women the same.
That's exactly right. And I talk a lot about Margaret Sanger and her role in that. And just, she actually talks a lot about how she loved being a housewife and a mother. And then she and her husband moved to Paris and she met all these radicals. And that's when she really got involved in the birth control movement and obviously all the pieces that came out of that, including Planned Parenthood and the eugenics and all of those elements. But fundamentally, she was trying to do what feminists have been trying to do already, which was make women this model of the masculine, where they could then have sex the way that men do. They didn't have to have children. They were, absolutely free of that bondage, and they could become human.
Yeah, right.
Back to that language of that non-maternal language. So this is why the confusion about what a woman exists, because we've stripped out the elements of womanhood and replaced them with this masculine.
It was just hormones. It was just whether you stay pregnant or not.
Yeah.
That's no big deal.
Yeah. No. And I think that's one of the areas that there just needs to be so much more research done on the biological ramifications of the pill and how much it's damaged us. I know there was a study or a conference done several years ago by Vicki Thorne, who was the woman that founded Project Rachel, and she worked with thousands of women who had had abortions and tried to help bring them to a place of healing. Yeah. And she's the one that told me that she went to Russia. She met a woman who had had 80 abortions.
Yeah, you wrote that down.
In the book. Yeah.
Yes.
But she was really interested
and you also said how many abortions were done in 2023.
Yeah, the number's
40-some million.
Yeah. Oh, more than all the other causes of death combined. So, yeah. 40 million, I think. What's the population of Canada? Isn't it like 39 million?
Right. All the people.
So imagine if Canada's wiped out in a single year from some plague or something. There would be T-shirts. There would be, Save Canada. There would be just this incredible moral cause that people would rally to. And yet that's exactly the opposite, because we've been so programmed to think that our children are the problem instead of something to be cherished and loved and raised. And
also they're so small they don't have a voice.
Yeah.
And so, we're supposed to be their voice.
Yes.
At the beginning. The parents are supposed to be the baby's voice.
And I think that's if you have to distill feminism down to one thing, that's probably the most tragic thing. Is that most fundamental relationship between a mother and a child. I mean, there's having had 5 children and several miscarriages, I can tell you, well that there's something incredibly deep and non-rational and just, but that's what's been severed, is that fundamental relationship, and distorted and, turned into something really unhealthy. And this is the fruit.
So let's not go that way.
Let's not go there anymore.
We don't have to.
No, we don't. We don't.
No, there's nothing forcing us to go that direction.
No, there really isn't.
And
really isn't.
We have so many opportunities that we have the opportunities to be mothers again. Yeah, so let's celebrate instead, right?
Yeah. And I've met a lot of women too that have gotten past the point where they're not going to have children. They're not married.
Me too.
And it's heartbreaking. And yet there's plenty for them to do. There's still that call.
There is, but it's a little bit lonely.
Yeah. No, it's very much a bittersweet aspect to it, particularly when they figure out that they've been lied to. The feminist vision makes it look like our life is going to be so fun. And then you get to that point and you realize this is not what I thought I was signing up for. It's very isolating.
Very isolating.
And then you can see how the devil will use that, to then, especially if women have had abortions, to start being the accuser, which of course we know that's not what God wants for women either. We don't want them to live without guilt. We want them to get to a place of healing and to embrace that child and, what it was that the love that child has for the mother, and to, move beyond that and get to a place of healing.
Well, it's complicated.
It's very complicated.
Especially if you've had many abortions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even one, but many abortions. That'd be difficult. There must be people that are working on that, because everybody is trying to help with that.
But I think
it's not a good highway to go down.
One question I would like to ask you, actually, that I think is really interesting, is just even to see the fact that it's not a good highway at all, but it also sort of toughens you. You become, it's like that cauliflower ear, the boxer's ear. Like there's sort of a hardness that happens. And so that's really interesting to me, because that's still masculine. So you have all these women that are moving to the masculine, but so much of it is because of the brokenness, that they don't understand their vulnerability. And it's not just a weakness, but it's a gift, that's something that needs to be cherished by a husband, and the vulnerability of a child and whatnot. But we just keep pushing at other direction of trying to say it's a weakness that we need to, we become sort of tougher.
Yeah. Well, when I decided to, first of all, I didn't decide. When God told me, He came down and told me to pay attention, really. And I did, finally. I'm sure I'd been told many times before that, but I hadn't paid any attention. My husband said, and he's known me since I was 8 years old. Mm-hmm. He said I'm more like I was when I was a kid.
Wow.
And so that is what happens when you have God in your life.
Yeah. Your defenses don't have to be so.
No, you don't have to harden up like that. And we've all made mistakes. Mm. We could all harden up, but there's the forgiveness that comes with this transcendent relationship that allows us to live on in peace.
Yeah. No, that's
and there's no other way, really, actually, to find peace. That's it. You're lucky, though. There's just one choice. You don't even have to decide. There's just one choice.
It's just that simple.
That's right.
Stop trying to check all the boxes. There's just one.
There's just one.
That's great.
It's one extra special one. So my podcast is called The Divine Feminine. At first, I was praying the rosary, and I was wanting to learn more about it. This was really in the early parts of my journey towards Catholicism. But then I realized that the Divine Feminine had good and it had bad in it. It had scary. It had joyous and scariness in it. What does it mean to you personally?
I think it's really interesting, because there's obviously the issue of, what do you mean by the divine feminine? Mm-hmm. And I think we're obviously created male and female, and those are the two ways in which God's attributes are instantiated or made plain in the world. And maybe this is what's so tragic too about sort of this idolization of the masculine, because we miss out on the gifts that the feminine have and has to offer the culture. But you can see too, there's that that beauty of the complementarity of male and female, and even one of my favorite scripture passages is it's Isaiah, I think it's 49, where he talks. Scripture mentions that even if your mother could forget you, I will not forget you, and I think that feels like such a feminine, divine attribute and aspect of it, because it's very hard for a mother to forget her child.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No, it's not. So it tells you even more so, if God can do better than any human woman. I think it's, one of those places that just is a great source of wonder, is to start thinking about what are the ways in which women embody the attributes of God in a feminine way. So I don't know if that feels like a fair articulation of it. I guess you have to thread the needle of there's so many that want that, the goddess within. You don't want to leave people with that kind of impression that we're somehow goddesses or something. But I feel like there's, those basic things that women do. We hold things, we nourish things, we protect them, but we also create an environment for them to grow. It's like gardening. It's
right. So you have to be brave. We have to let them go.
Yes. Yeah. It's that balance of giving enough to it so that it can grow, but then like working yourself out of a job, like being free,
right?
Letting them be who they are instead of, Mother Gothel or whoever, these awful, terrible women that are trying to control everything and put their children in a box or keep them to themselves.
Yeah, the Oedipal mother.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's sort of how I think about it, but it becomes much more beautiful and dynamic when you add the masculine and the feminine back together. I just wrote a chapter for a book actually talking about that balance of vulnerability, that the woman has to make herself vulnerable, usually at the time of her life where she's least vulnerable, to have a baby. And, there are very few things as vulnerable as a baby and a mother, a newborn baby and the mother.
Yeah.
And that's where the husband certainly, but then even the bigger family, hopefully, can help provide the space so that couples can create the future, So anyway, those are kind of my
husband told me he was hesitant to have kids. I was not hesitant at all, and he went out for a walk one day and thought about why he was hesitant. And he thought, I'm finishing my PhD. I'm in my postdoc. I don't have a job yet. I'm hesitant. So he came home and he told me that. And I told him I was going to take care of the baby. So he didn't really have to worry about that, because he said, I don't have time to take care of a baby. And it's like, well, I probably wouldn't ask you. And so then we did have our first child. But he did say, I'll take care of you and you take care of the baby.
Yeah.
And that was the deal. And you say, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And of course, now he couldn't imagine life any other way.
Any other way.
So, yeah. No, it's really, I think, beautiful that that's what the family is to the bedrock to be able to create future generations and raise them. So
yes, and the father is you have to have the father there, because the father represents the social world. And so if that little person is going to learn little by little how to get into the world, the father introduces it by throwing the baby up in the air and playing rough and tumble and all of that is that preparation for getting out into the world.
Right. Meanwhile, the mother is looking on.
Going, you guys really have to do that? Finally, my son had to say, Mom, we're okay.
It's okay. I'm
It's like, oh, okay. Well, I won't do anything.
But that's an important thing, too, is also letting that relationship between father and son or father and daughter, between the father and the children, exist and not be controlled by safetyism and that kind of.
That's for sure. And that is something also that this idea of safety in our culture, right, has become a very leading principle. And I've seen that, and I did it a little bit too, I'm sure, in my family, to be the one who wants the kids to be safe, even though the father wants to be an adventurer with them.
Yeah.
And so you have to be really careful of that, because the father has to do those. The child needs it. Yeah. The child needs to have skinned knees and bumped heads and all of that. They need all of that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the, issues that's really, I've thought a lot about too, is women naturally have this desire to mother, but oftentimes we just turn that mothering to our husbands, as well, and sort of control them instead of that dynamic. We're called wives for a reason. We're not meant to mother our husbands. We're meant to be in a different kind of relationship with them. And so that can come up a lot too when we're trying to over-control the relationship that the husband has or the father has with the children.
Well, I think too, there's the obligation that we have to love our husbands. And if you're not going to honor that, then maybe you're going to turn to being wanting to mother them.
Yeah.
Or control them or something. And so, again, you have to be vulnerable. You have to, you have to be vulnerable in your relationship with your husband to have a healthy relationship.
Yeah. And allow them to make mistakes, too. I know at one point there was something my husband and I were, he wasn't doing. And I was like, why are you not doing this? And I finally talked to my spiritual director about it. And he said, let him fail. And of course, I was like, oh, that's genius. I don't have to worry about it. And then I realized it was actually more genius because it allowed me to let him do what he needed to do. And I was not
so that he could learn how to do a better way or something.
And he, of course, did it, and maybe I was nagging, it allowed that break in our relationship for him to do what he was responsible for. And to do. And I've thought about that so many times, like, what are there other areas where I do this, what do I just need to let go of, for sure.
Yeah. Let God, let go. Let go, let God.
Surrender.
Surrender.
And that I think is a deep characteristic of the female divinity, is that capacity to surrender and to be open and to let fruit grow.
Right.
And we don't feel like we have to control it all.
Yeah. Right. Let's not.
I agree.
Thank you very much for coming on my podcast.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure to meet you.
It was great to meet you. Great to meet you.